Hi, welcome back. Chapter 2 of It's a Mistake begins now. Can't stop what has begun. Signed, sealed, they deliver oblivion. Pink Floyd. Tombrow Panna placed his cruiser into a waiting space. He was at the police department in Norbit's capital city of Dock. Panna didn't have a clue what he was doing here, except that a Norbitian city had been destroyed. Several planet rotations back, while Panna was getting drunk in a Venetian strip club, his boss had left a message on his Uni app. A network access phone containing a camera, voice recorder, address book, radio, flashlight, and bottle opener, which sat on his cruiser's control board. Panna? There had been a long pause while Tony Vinchno, editor of Galactic Press Service, GPS, debated the odds of Tombrow answering. Panna? He waited again as if Tombrow might yet decide to answer before giving that up. Okay, I need you to go find out what happened on a world called Norbit. Seems something's demolished an entire city. Could have been a meteorite, but for some reason nobody seems to think so. It might be worth a look. Call me after you get moving. Panna? He allowed another long pause before severing the connection. After leaving the club, falling into his cruiser, and seeing the flashing message notification, Panna promptly passed out. He woke to find out 4 more messages, all from Vinchno, had been received. Panna smiled sadistically. He grabbed a cup of Multonian coffee from one of 5 nearby Pelegs before retrieving his messages and got moving. Once in cruising mode, he called Vinchno, explaining he had passed out inside the club, so only found the messages this morning. Tell me about what happened, Tony. What do you know? I don't know anything, Tom, because I don't have a reporter on the scene. Vinchno's raised voice sarcastically intoned. I don't even know if this makes for a good story, but we picked up some transmissions for lots of medical aid on a planet called Norbit. I checked with the medical stations and found out that a city's been destroyed. That's all I've heard, Panna. Well, that's not much to go on, Tony. Tombrow scratched at his scalp, causing black bangs to hide violet eyes. His hair was ear-length, but parted down center, so the bangs framed his front eyes like curtains. In back of his egg-shaped head, hair stopped growing just past the crown, ensuring unfettered sight for his second pair of eyes, which were also violet. Panna also had a nose on each side, but only bearded growth in place of his absent rear mouth. Atmosphere on Tombrow's home planet, Tadic, one of 3 planets in orbit around Gliese 581c, was very thin. 2 noses and enlarged bronchial tubes, which made his neck thicker, supplied a greater amount of air to his lungs. The extra nose also kept his eyes in back from seeming forlorn. Panna had just passed his 45th birthday, but lack of gray in his black hair or wrinkles in his pale skin made Panna look 10 years younger. He didn't feel 10 years younger, though. In fact, he felt 20 years older. He'd been watching the young stripper on Verita, not with lust, but with envy. He kept thinking about what great-looking skin she had instead of what that skin was covering. So smooth, he sighed. Not a blemish on her. I'm sure someone can tell you where to find this city, Panna. It was a city, Vinchno yelled. Look on a map for an empty space where a city should be. That's probably it. Vinchno paused to regain composure. You're the reporter, Panna, remember? When you find out what's going on, tell me. That's what reporters do, I'm told. Panna chuckled while brushing aside his drapes. Who told you that? A reporter, Vinchno roared. His voice was replaced by a steady buzzing indicating he'd severed the connection. Panna shook his head while laughing. What a character, he mused. Panna doubted authenticity of complete demolition, though agreed it was worth checking into. The cruiser's engine revved down into a dock police station parking space. He grabbed his digipad, which is a notebook-type device used for writing, research, and setting lunch on, and jumped out. Panna moved quickly inside because time could be important, though probably wasn't. Collapsing onto the watchman's counter and leaning over it as if he might pull himself across, Panna asked the officer what was up. He got a blank stare in return. That depends, the cop finally said. Did you hear that something's up? Yeah, I'm told you're missing a city. Is that true? Destroyed's more like it. You make it sound like Stella just got up and walked away. Who are you? Tombrow Panna, GPS. Panna's brow furrowed with surprise. Had the city actually been completely destroyed? My editor hustled me down here to find out what happened. So what happened? Panna jotted down the city's name. The officer gave a snort. I don't think anyone's here. He stood up, looked around a corner at the busy squad room, and returned to his desk. No, everyone's out. He's down and sat down and looked at a computer screen. Try back later. Panna sighed. You've had an entire city destroyed. I should think you'd want as much help as possible to find out why. The officer looked back at Panna as if he were a persistent mosquito. He hated mosquitoes, having once been bitten 14 times on a kneecap during a picnic at Lake Winnipeg. We have connections to stations all over the galaxy. Whoever did this will pay, I assure you, Mr. Panna. The cop's right eyebrow raised inquisitively, and Tombrow nodded. We'll find them. We don't need journalists trying to make us look incompetent, though. Such a view would only embolden whoever did this to do it again. Maybe some publicity would also embolden someone who knows something to call you. The officer snorted again. If they know something, then they should call us anyway. All right, thanks. Panna turned and left. There was no point in working a dead end. He wandered over to a field of patrol vehicles. Many officers were getting ready to head out. Panna asked a dozen of them if they knew anything about Stella, but most said no. A few just turned away. One older cop told Panna to go muff himself. Panna replied that being able to do so would solve a lot of his problems. While disappointing, lack of cooperation was hardly surprising. Cops were rarely eager to pass on information. So Panna already had an alternate plan. He found a bookstore barely a half mile from the station. Then he located the travel section and pulled out a map of the area. In no time, he found Stella, made a note of its location, or at least where it used to be, and headed east. Stella had occupied a small valley flanking the Gore Mountains, a trip of 17 LMs. LMs are light minutes, roughly 8 minutes of Earth time. That distance made it all the more curious that the cops had been so closed-mouthed. Usually distant events mellowed an outrage into something more of a sympathetic curiosity. The curiosity makes conversation about it more desirable in order to make sense of a senseless incident. Conversely, though, horrific things become more personal, resulting in possessive emotions, and made them less conversational. So Panna began to suspect that the entire city really had been obliterated, and his expression turned grim. At Zone Aught, he found thousands of beings milling around. Some of them were obviously just loitering as if it were a tourist spot, but many of them were laying wreaths around the jagged edges. Others merely wandered around dazed, their minds unable to grasp the immensity of such destruction, mumbling to themselves. The scene was rather moving, but also very surreal. Whatever did this might have created problematic health concerns, yet these beings wore no protective devices or clothing. They weren't even kept to a safer distance from the crater. To Panna, it seemed an irresponsible allowance in favor of emotional release. The crater itself looked awesome, but not in a good sense of the word. Within a few miles of its center, nothing survived. No buildings, no plant life, and no bodies. Panna reasoned they must have all been collected by now, cleared away. Yet for all the activity, nobody moved within the blackened hole. Also, it didn't seem that enough time had passed for such an enormous salvage operation to have taken place. Against a severely scorched rock wall of the mountain on the crater's rim, Panna saw beings moving around carrying testing equipment and cautiously taking soil samples or waving instruments in the air. These beings wore protective cups below their goggled eyes and white hooded suits. Panna set his cruiser down and walked up to one of them. He watched the man put dirt samples into a large container, mark where it came from, and place the container alongside many others on blackened stone slabs. "Hi," Panna called out. The guy spun around, surprised, and squinted up at Panna's face. "Hi, who are you?" "Tombrow Panna. I'm a reporter for GPS. You guys working for the government?" The guy surprised Panna by holding out one of his 6 hands. Panna took it into one of his own 2 and shook. During this greeting, 2 of the guy's other hands sealed another jar of dirt, one held another empty container, and one pulled cloth loose from the seat of his pants. "Gosh, no. We're trying to determine what's happened here." Yeah, but you're not doing it for the government?" "No, we're doing scientific testing. They don't approve of science." "Are you suggesting your government isn't trying to determine what happened?" "Well, they're trying, all right. They just don't believe that science can determine it." "How are they seeking to explain it, then?" By consulting the stars. They think everything's explainable by star charts, constellations, and which quadrants certain lunar bodies are inhabiting. Panna looked at the man and blinked several times. He was flabbergasted, but tried not to show it. "I take it you folks don't agree." Panna addressed the question to everyone. They stopped working and looked up at him. Slowly, they all shook their heads as if needing to be careful. Panna frowned, nodding sympathetically. "Have they got any theories, then?" "They think it might have been a large rock dropped from the bowl of Kathy. She's the constellation in our heavens right now. She carries a large bowl that was always said to contain water, but now they're thinking it actually contains rocks." Panna chuckled. "And what do you guys think it was?" "What, in Kathy's bowl?" Panna erupted in full gale laughter. "No, that destroyed Stella." "Oh, well, nobody knows. Never seen anything like this, but we don't think it was rocks." This drew soft laughter from his mates. "At least not rocks from a bowl. We've been hit by a couple of meteors before. They're unlikely in these parts, though, so we don't have much data about them. But they didn't do this kind of damage. So we don't think it was one of those rocks either. Could have been some kind of craft, we suppose, but there's no debris. Of course, it could have disintegrated, but that seems unlikely. There'd be something left, wouldn't there?" He looked imploringly at Panna, who gave him a blank stare in return. Sure there would, the scientist confirmed to himself. You'd think so, Panna confirmed. So what's your name? Barclay Sandero. Yours? Tombrow Panna. Call me Tombrow. Panna noticed a few beat-up vehicles parked nearby. They looked just like what a scientist would have driven on Totic. Can you give me a tour of this site? The scientist grinned. He didn't get many chances to be on center stage. Absolutely, Tombrow. Let's take this one. Sandero pointed to what was presumably his vehicle. Panna quickly got in before Sandero could think better of it and pulled out his digipad as the door closed. This area used to be an amphitheater, Sandero explained, while getting in and starting the craft. Those stone slabs, those were polished sections of the stage right over there where the crater's horizon begins was the seating area. Those slabs only survived because the event's blast stopped short of the stage. With that, Sandero put the cruiser in gear and they rode out into the event area. They flew over the entire perimeter of what used to be Stoa. Sandero pointed out a spot that went deeper into the ground and explained this was the point of impact. The depression was dead center. What structures had been out of reach stood around the crater's edge. Vacant strip malls, charred restaurants, unusable churches and houses. Stoa hadn't been a very large city, so even these petered out after a few miles. Wow, it's almost like a volcanic explosion suddenly went off beneath it, Panna said as he took pictures of the ground. We thought of that, but this didn't come from underneath. Sandero pointed out things like scorching patterns and emanating lines gouged out from the center. It came from ground level. And there's no rock, nothing buried in the ground? No. Whatever did this either disintegrated upon impact or Sandero let the thought trail off. Or what, Barclay? Panna looked up from the ground to peer at his host. Sandero seemed very troubled by an idea he couldn't explain. Or it simply vanished, gone as part of the event, Sandero shrugged. Panna's brow furrowed. Some kind of photon weapon? But why? Why would anyone take such a shot at our planet? Why would they wipe out a small, undefended village? Besides, there are residues from such weapons, and we haven't found any. Panna nodded as these objections settled into acceptance. Good point. He looked back toward the ground and raised an eyebrow. Were there any residues at all? Oh yeah, tritium for one. We're also finding very large amounts of neutrons, which is consistent with tritium. Very radioactive stuff. Panna nodded. Sandero's reference to radiation set a memory floating around in his head like the triangle in a magic 8-ball. As Sandero spoke, the idea continued to appear and disappear into murky darkness. He looked off into Norbit's horizon and was surprised to find himself recalling his time as a war correspondent during the inane Earth-Karos conflict. His mind saw images of weapons fired by Earth that were hideously crude. He pulled out his Uni app connected with GPS archives and opened his picture file. It took a few minutes, but he found a shot of one of those, a long white pill-like object with 4 tail fins. Panna held the Uni app so Sandero could watch the footage. Sandero witnessed the solid weapons completely vaporized within the huge blast that followed contact with their target. As Sandero watched, the idea floating around Panna's brain stopped. The prognosis was now very clear for him. The way those vaporized is very like what happened here, Sandero broke Panna's ruminations. A reporter relies heavily on the feelings in his gut, his intuition. Panna shifted his gaze from Uni app to the crater below him, and his gut registered a 9.2. He knew this was the thing that had slammed into Stoa. He also realized that, if he was right, many more of them were probably out there. In space. floating around like beasts hunting for a kill. Slowly, he looked back into Barclay's eyes. Barclay, we have a problem. See you in chapter 3.